Sheila Hancock. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Facing the Music with Philip Quast.
Well, there he is, the mighty Quast, beamed in all the way from Oz. Philip, it's great to see you. It's been a long time.
Yeah. It's so lovely to see you too. It's been a long time. It has, actually.
I mean,
precisely we last saw each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Folly's time, which we'll be talking about later. It doesn't sound like lockdown has been a huge hardship for you with your fishing and cooking and Zoom teaching and pickling, I gather. Pickling is on the agenda.
All the things I normally used to do and still do. And in fact, I've just done a show for the Sydney Festival. I did a new cabaret show I'd written. So we had audiences for that. I went to the opera the other night. It was full. We wore masks.
Wow.
I went to this opening show at the Sydney Theatre Company. It was full. We all wore masks because we've got this wonderful app where you go on when you go in, and everyone's been pretty good. If you've got a cold, basically, you don't go to the theatre, you don't come to school, you go and get tested. And relatively, because of that, no one's been sick because they're washing their hands and not coughing over anyone else.
So, you have a few lessons to teach us, I think. There, London is a difficult city too, although it's a ghost town now.
It is, yeah. And my son is there. I'm sorry, we've got to get used to the interruptions. My son is, of course, in London, so I've kept up with how things are going.
Yeah.
And
now, Philip, of all the actors and artists I've come to know over the years, you're about as far removed from a lovey as I think it's possible to be. I guess growing up on a farm in New South Wales will do that for you. Real life.
Yeah. In fact, Ed, I don't want to drop a name, but I was having an email conversation with Stephen Sondheim just in the last couple of weeks.
As you do.
As you do. And I was telling him about my childhood, how I had to put my own dog down because that was the thing you had to do, and how I worked in an abattoirs, and the men on the farm, because we had to kill turkeys on weekends, they would put me upside down in the blood bucket. And Stephen Sondheim described it as positively Dickensian, I think. Said, how did you get to be an actor from that background?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've got this great quote of yours, though, which you said, the most successful actors don't define themselves by what they do as much as who they are. Can you elaborate a little on that for us? Because that's a great quote.
Well, Ed, I have to say, as I've got older, and there's an element of survival and longevity, those actors that have survived and have longevity, in the end, are basically wonderful people. Bad behavior now is not brooked in the rehearsal room, nor should it be. And I think the other things I see in great actors that's common being a parent, being a good human being, activism, all the other things you do besides acting. And gradually I've come to realize that it's not separate from what we do. And I'm constantly surprised that the great actors have whole other lives, which it's those other lives which inform who they are as actors. And of course, the public only sees their public persona and their characters.
Exactly. And it's this great myth that actors are confident people because very often they're very inward people. And the title of this series, Philip, is Facing the Music, which suggests an inquisition of sorts. But rest assured that music is the operative word here. What were your first musical memories down on the farm in New South Wales? I mean, what did your parents listen to?
Well, we had, to my regret, I never learned to play the piano, but that's partly because we were too useful as labourers on the farm. So you didn't have time to learn the piano. That was taking hours away from the work you did, driving the tractors or shoveling manure or whatever it is you had to do. So the big thing in Australia is everyone had pianolas. That's the old pedal piano. Yeah. And you would buy the rolls and you'd put them in and you could change the key and you could change the tempo. And inevitably or invariably, it was Rodgers and Hammerstein. So there was South Pacific and Carousel, and there was the Student Prince. And where I grew up, we had no television. for a long time, we really didn't get decent television until I was probably about 12. And the reception was so bad that we had to watch it through blue cellophane to see it through the snow on the television.
Wow.
And so we listened to the radio. For me, it was country and Western music all the time, every night, where I grew up, and or pedaling the pedal piano, and you'd sit around and sing because there was no television. So that's, I think,
Voices
how I
then,
felt.
because I read somewhere, I think, that you used to listen to people like Mario Lanza and
Oh, I
Gordon
did, yeah.
McRae, and I mean, were they on disc in the house or just on the radio?
Yeah, yes, they were. They were on. We had those on disc, and I sort of used to listen to the same things my grandmother listened to.
Yeah.
So I loved all those songs. Like they were on the pianola rolls. They were "Bless This House" and "The Lord's Prayer," "Ave Maria." All those sort of things were the standards that you got on pedal piano, and so we learned those, and the Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Yeah,
As well.
mentioning Gordon McRae, you know, the definitive Billy
Yeah,
Bigelow, I guess, and you know,
yeah.
someone that you would see a connection with because you developed a voice not dissimilar to his, although you've got a better top than his, perhaps. Um,
Well, I think the other thing that was space ed. There was so much space, so I could make noise. And certainly teaching now, the biggest challenge that young students have is they often don't live at home, and if they're in rented accommodation, and it's become very difficult because you have to, in order to use your voice, you have to make noise, you have to experiment with it, you have to try it out. And I'm teaching young music students now, and they're told they have to have shared households, so they can't ever practice their instrument. There's nowhere to go.
right.
You can't yell because someone in the housing block will say "shut up."
Yeah. Yeah. When
And
did you first recognize that this sonorous voice was developing as a young man? And did you pay any attention to it? Was it just something you did, or could you see that it could be an instrument that you could use dramatically in the future?
well, again, as I said, because I tried it out, I used to sort of try and send up opera singers. So, if I was singing Maria Lanza, I'd go, "Ah," I'd do that.
Yeah.
And I found ways of it not hurting. And it wasn't mimicking, don't get me wrong. It was just being able to explore vocality out when no one was around without fear of judgment. And so I was never told to shut up or embarrassed because no one was around. And of course, it's the big challenge with teaching because, I did play school here for 17 years, and the first 4 years of a child's life is learning more language, talking, singing songs, clapping, jumping around, being free, and their voice is never an issue. And then they go to school and they're told to sit down and shut up. Why are you talking so much? Shh. So then this new strain comes where what before was this wonderful asset, your parents were teaching new words, has suddenly become a yoke around your neck,
Yeah.
excuse the pun, but it has. And suddenly you realize now I'm trying to break through the damage that kids have at school for talking too much or using their voices.
You had by all accounts, quite an inspirational music teacher. Am I right? And teachers don't realize how important they are. And I mean, what did they discover in you? What did this teacher find in you that?
Well, it was accident really, because I had a teacher who loved Gilbert and Sullivan. That was the high school, and of course, how do you get boys into the music theatre? And he wanted Pirates and in for Pirates of Penzance, or and
Was
so
that the
he went
piece
to
you
football.
did? You did.
Yeah, he went to the football. He went to the footy team,
Yeah.
and of course, he said, there's lots of girls there, and so the football team went and all became pirates and pinafore and those sort of things. So we were soldiers and sailors and policemen and it was fantastic. It was not the normal way that men join musical theatre, if you understand what I'm saying. Normally it's the preserve of outcasts and those that are bullied and they find solace in that tribe. But no, this teacher said, why doesn't the football team come in? And it became a tradition, really, for the 3 years I was in high school to be in the school musical because you could have fun.
What did you play
And
in Pirates? Were you
I
Pirate
think,
King?
yes,
Of
and
course.
then is it Dick Deadeye? Was that in Pinafore? No, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then Pooh in Mikado.
Oh, terrific. I mean, Gilbert
And they
and
were those
Sullivan, people,
baritone parts.
I mean, Gilbert and Sullivan, so important in the genesis of the musical. And, you know, in fact, you listen to many, many early Broadway shows, like the Gershwin shows, and they're full of
Yeah.
Gilbert and Sullivan. In
Yeah.
fact, there's this lovely little, I don't know if you've heard this before, but there's a lovely little apocryphal story of a first night of a Gershwin show, one of their early shows, where the two of them are pacing up and down the lobby nervously, and suddenly these two guys come in toppers and tails. They're late for the show, and they rush through the lobby into the auditorium, and George turns to Ira and says, "It's G&S, come to fix the show." So
Well,
they
that's
knew.
absolutely true.
They knew.
Yeah.
You know, amazing
And
stuff.
in fact, one of the kids brought it in to us when I was teaching at NIDA today. One of the students or two of them brought in a duet. I can't remember what it was now because I heard so much music today. And it provided all the acting challenges that you would ever need to teach music theatre. And it's very easily dismissed, but it requires such dexterity and to understand the wordplay, to get the images. And of course, we slowed it right down. We talked the lyrics through. And once we started talking the lyrics through, people were just enthralled
Amazing.
and in thrall with the words. Because, of course, everyone learns songs at show pace. And you know me, I have to slow down and talk it through because that came from Trevor Nunn, of literally talking it through really slowly and trying to replicate the process the composer went through when they were, or the writer went through when they wrote those words. And exactly what you do with Shakespeare, you start to then read the acting in the text.
I'm focusing in today. I mean, the breadth of your work is tremendous in straight theatre as well as musical theatre. I should put that down straight away. But we're focusing in today on musicals, and I'm looking at one or two of Quast's greatest hits here. They've earned you 3 Olivier Awards and equivalent awards in Oz. Let's start, though, with Les Miserables. The role of obsessive Inspector Javert, which you created in the Australian premiere in 1987. Over the last couple of years, Philip, I've become quite a musical soulmate with Claude Michel Schoenberg. We're very much on the same wavelength, and we've had some good times together. And he knows exactly what he wants dramatically when he writes. Was he at your first audition for Les Mis? Tell us about how you got that role.
Well, it is infamous, really, because I didn't know anything about the show, and I just knew the musical fans here had seen it in England, and I went to a general audition, and we all had to hear "Do You Hear the People Sing?" And there's a sort of G in that, if you remember, and I sort of remember we got to that part. When the greeting of your heart echoes the greeting of, that bit. And I hadn't sung for a long time.
Yeah.
Because I was doing plays at the time. And I embarrassingly cracked so bad because I couldn't reach it. And I think Cameron was there, Claude Michel, Alain. Trevor wasn't there at that stage. He came over for the next audition. James Thane, John Rubber, the producers from Australia, and a whole heap of people I didn't know. So I embarrassingly said, "Oh, well, it's a bit sort of." So I said, "I'll give it another go," and the same thing happened. When the beating of your heart, I'm really getting embarrassed just thinking about it now, and I turned to the piano player who I knew a bit, and he said, "Look, don't worry, Philip. Everyone's been having trouble with that note today. It's okay." So I said, "I'll give it another go." I got to it and I knew I wasn't going to get it. And I turned really, really quite violently. And out of embarrassment, I looked at the panel, who I didn't know any of them were, and grabbed my music and said, "If you wanted to hear how high I could sing, you should have got me to sing fucking scales." And I grabbed my music and started storming out. And Cameron used to tell the story that they all went, "Javert, it's Javert." Because I changed from being this sort of charming, smiling person in an instant to being an absolute shit, because
Yeah.
I didn't. And of course, Claude Michel said, called me back, and he said, "Do you know stars?" And he said it, and I said, "No, I don't fucking know anything." Is it all right if I swear? It's okay if I swear, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he sat at the piano and he started going like this. I never forget. He went, "There, out in the darkness." And he started singing it. So I started going, "There, out in the darkness." And he said, "Are you French?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you're behaving like a Frenchman." And then they gave me the music and said, "Take away and learn this song."
Yeah.
And which I did. And in the meantime, I was doing a movie and I broke a bone in a very severe fracture in my leg, my foot. And I auditioned in plaster when Trevor came back about 6 weeks later. And he did what Trevor does. He slowed you down and calmed me down. And he had a jacket. And I sang for him and he gave me direction. We spoke through the lyrics. He spoke about the role and he said, "I can't quite see you." I was only 28. And he took his coat off and jacket and draped it over my shoulders and said, and then I sang it and took his notes on board. And I finished and he said, "Well, wonderful. I'll see you in July or whenever rehearsal started." And that was it.
Extraordinary. Before we talk more about Trevor, because I know you think very highly of him.
Yes, I do.
Let us consider another thing. One of the gifts that cannot be taught among musicians and actors is the gift of melody. And Klobuchar Schomburg certainly has that gift. It's an extraordinary thing. I mean, when you think back to someone like Mozart, it's a question of only those notes will do. And if you displace one of them, the magic is lost. I always say that the mark of a great melody is where the next note seems inevitable the second after you've heard it. And it's a black magic. No one knows how it happens, but the great melodists are there. And I think Klobuchar Schoenberg, it really is a tremendous talent in that respect.
Well, he also is, he understands, I don't want to demean him when I say this, he understands, oh, my chair just sank down. Oh, I'll have to adjust. It just suddenly sagged down. He understands pop music too.
Yeah,
And he's not
absolutely.
frightened of popular music. You know what I
Yes.
mean by popular
Yes,
music?
yeah, indeed.
He's not frightened of a melody. And I think he wrote pop songs.
He did,
jingles,
he
and
did, with
he understands how it has to
Boublil.
grab.
Yeah.
But I think it also comes from the French thing that I love no composer more than Charles Aznavour, and although he's not French, Jacques Brel, and Léo Fer. Is it Fer? Fer? And the wonderful thing about the French is they have that ability to make this incredible melody, even though the lyrics are, and they're not frightened of men to sit there and sing about a candle flickering in the wind, and that makes me think of my lost love.
It's interesting you say that, because Claude Michel always says that he has to have a piece of visual information before he can start writing anything at all.
Yes.
A dramatic situation and a visual piece of information. What do you feel about the through-sung aspect? I did ask him about this. I said, why did we all know how it all came about, rock operas, an attempt to elevate the craft or the genre, if you like, to make it more respectable, things like Jesus Christ Superstar. But I asked him why he didn't want to write book song format, and he said, because I am not clever enough. He said to me and Alain are not clever enough to do what Sondheim does. I mean, I didn't take that reply too seriously, but it's an interesting question, isn't it?
Well, of course, Sondheim always believes that he needs the book writer first. So
yes.
He would first to say, it's not a Stephen Sondheim musical.
Yeah, it's the play is the thing. Yeah.
The play is the thing. And so it is story. And he gets upset sometimes, when he said, it's not just a Stephen Sondheim music, it is a collaborator. Right. So what happens is that the way opera works now, and the younger singers rush to get through the recitative because they want to get to the hits. And they regard the recitative as being important. But I've been working a lot on Wagner, for instance, and, it's questionable, Wagner and the politics and everything, but he wrote the recitative and staged it. And I've come to love the recitative more than anything else, because that's where that delivers the songs. And I found in Les Miserables, it's very, very difficult to do that sung through stuff, but it requires all the precision, and it's difficult because you have tell me quickly you have to honor it and commit to it, because unless you do, you don't get that release of the melody. It sort of serves the same purpose in a way as the verse did before all the great musicals. In the great musicals, you have that verse before the songs release into the chorus.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And Trevor spent a lot of time literally getting you to speak through that recit stuff, not to backphrase, to actually commit to it, and without, you know what I mean by backphrase. And it's very hard sometimes, and to speak it. Tell me quickly, what's the story? Tell me what and why and where. And to try and understand the quick changes of thought. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And once you get that clear, exactly like Shakespeare, slow down, build it up. I can't imagine. I think that's where all the character work comes from. You just...
Yeah, it's interesting because I was brought up... So, me... speak to someone like Lloyd Webber about through sung, he will say, well, I want the music to drive the narrative. That's his response to the question. Whereas Steve Sondheim would say, I want there to be a different dynamic from when people speak and when they sing. I want to subvert that idea quite a lot.
Yes, and the challenge as a singer, of course, is that you have to, it's different with opera, but you have to be able to make the journey from speech into song seamless in musicals.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear someone speak in one voice then sing in another. So I spend a lot of time trying to speak everyday life in my singing voice, so that when I start to sing, it doesn't feel like I've ever started. It's a bit like when I hear Ella Fitzgerald sing, I just don't even know she's singing sometimes. It feels like dialogue. So I want to actually be able to speak, and then all of a sudden I go into song and you don't even know I've changed. So the audience is just, you don't know the moment that the song has started. You don't even notice they've started rhyming. You don't even notice they've started something that's structured. Do you know what I mean? And I suppose it works in the same way as prose does with verse in Shakespeare.
Well, let's hear the song that Claude Michel pointed you towards at your audition, and you initially sang with a French accent.
Are you going to sit through this?
You're going to have to listen to this.
Out in the darkness, a fugitive running, fallen from God, fallen from grace. God be my witness, I never shall yield till we come face to face, till we come face to face. He knows his way in the dark, mine is the way of the Lord. Those who follow the path of the righteous shall have their reward. And if they fall as Lucifer fell, the flame, the sword, stars in your multitudes, scarce to be counted, filling the darkness with order and light. You are the sentinels silent and sure, keeping watch in the night, keeping watch in the night. You know your place in the sky, you hold your course and your aim, and each in your season returns and returns, and is always the same. And if you fall as Lucifer fell, you fall in flames. And so it must be, for so it is written on the doorway to paradise, that those who falter and those who fall must pay the price. Lord, let me find him, that I may see him safe behind bars. I will never rest till then. This I swear by the stars.
Claude Michel always says he has to thank Puccini twice. Once for not writing Les Miserables, because Puccini was going to write an opera based on the novel, but thought it was too complicated. And secondly, for writing Madame Butterfly, which of course became Miss Saigon. How did Trevor Nunn help you crack Javert? What I noticed listening to that, Philip, again, as you said before, was the thought process. The fact that you were speaking through song.
Was that from the complete symphonic recording? Yes, I think so. Because I felt I probably progressed and grew on the role as I went on, and I think by the time I got to that 10th anniversary concert when it was Roar, and so I was very much younger then. But it's funny, Ed, I think I'm a bit of a autodidact. I'm a dilettante. I don't know, I dabble, but I can't speak another language like most Australians and Americans have a pathological fear of other languages. But Trevor opened up a whole new world for me about literature, and including after I worked with him, I was desperate to go to England and do the classics. And eventually did. I went to the Royal Shakespeare Company, and but what he did was he took his time through each one of those images for you to get it, hang on to it, see it, and then hang on to that image until the new thought came. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And of course, it's the big challenge with young actors today, because they let the thought go very, very quickly. And even young singing actors, it's hard because they text a message, send the message, and then they wait because it's gone. Mm-hmm. Whereas what would happen is I would actually text the message or say something and then wait for the reply. So I'm sort of pleased I started studying in that era before technology made life easier for me by having predictive text and doing the work for me, the thinking for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Trevor just gave you permission to slow down, talk through it. And I was thinking I mean, he didn't do it all, but he opened up this whole new world of studying. And when I was thinking about that then, I learned to see each image. I practiced finding it. So I remember when I went to London, or even here, I studied the stars in the Northern Hemisphere in winter. So I knew when I looked up, I knew exactly where Orion was. And when I looked up, I could see where Sagittarius was, where I could see where the stars were. Amazing. So I literally looked at them.
Yeah.
And by being given that time to find the image and just not rush the actor, because now the way you rehearse a musical is it's already been done somewhere. So the rehearsal time's very short. You learn it off the record, and you come knowing to rehearsals the first day knowing it, and you rehearse it at show tempo. You don't ever feel like you've created that. So Trevor always made it very, very clear to me that you have to slow down and bring yourself to it.
I remember you telling me once, Philip, about an audition you did for the Beast in Beauty and the Beast, and you actually said to the team there, now do you want the Broadway version or do you want the Philip Quast version? And they said, no, of course we want to see you. We want to see you do this. And of course, what happened?
Yeah, well, I did my version of it, and they said, thank you very much. Oh, no, yeah, and they said, thank you very much. And I realized they didn't want to see me. They wanted to see the Broadway version. So I went back and did the Broadway version, which, and and I remember grabbing, again, how embarrassing. I did another storm out. I grabbed my twisted face too. There's not the slightest trace of anything that even ends. And I suddenly did a sort of cod version of what I'd learnt of what the recording was. Yeah. Grabbed my Thai food that I'd cooked for that night and left the rehearsal singing because they didn't want to. There was no time. They wanted to see the performance there. They wanted to see it that first day. And I remember my agent rang me up and said, well, I'm sorry, but the answer is no. And I knew that was the case. And he said, do you want to know why? And I said, yes. And he said, well, because you're too aggressive. And I thought, for the Beast?
Philip, I know you've had some tough times with suffering from stage fright. And I'm wondering how it manifested itself and how did you come through the other side? Because, again, people think of actors as very confident souls, but they're anything but, in my experience.
Well, a virus entered my head one night. I was singing a song and I looked over, and it's partly the rehearsal process because Javert by nature is so emphatic. It says in the text that his cravat was undone. Now, no one else would have even noticed it, but just being the cravat being slightest askew meant, in Javert's world, that it was tantamount to a freight train derailing. So my performance, in a way, it's strangely method. I built up this. I didn't talk to anyone much because it took such concentration, and then I was singing the Suicide on the bridge one night, and I looked over, and these actors were mucking around, and people don't do it anymore. But one of the girls pulled down her top and exposed herself, and another one lifted up her dress, and someone else was mucking around doing something in the wings. And I remember I laughed at it, and I sang gobbledygook. I sort of went, and I didn't know where I was, and the orchestra. I didn't have a clue where I was on the music because I'd missed out a thought. It was like I'd jumped something, and it's tantamount to a virus entering. And I didn't think anything of it. I walked off stage and I laughed, and everyone rushed to the wings because I never made mistakes. And I had this delayed reaction. I got such a shock, I vomited into this garbage bin in the wings. And I thought that's a bit of overreaction. And the next night I went on stage, and as I walked out for the first time, I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't have a clue what came, and I started panicking, and then it went on for days, and my voice got tired because I wasn't sleeping. I'd wake up in cold sweats. I started writing little speeches on pieces of paper,
uncommon.
saying,
it's not
I'm
uncommon.
sorry. And then it got to such a stage, the musical director one night said, your voice is tired, I think you need a night off. And I had a night off, and it got worse. Now, the first thing that happened was eventually when I confessed to him what had happened, I went to an occupational therapist who dealt with stroke victims, who explained to me literally that it was a virus entering my head. And I've since learned about neuroreceptors and neuropathways, and that's helped me in teaching a lot, how those things close down. And basically, I had to distract myself and make eye contact with him. So I remember doing the suicide, and I'd look out into the pit, and he'd be smiling away while I was killing myself, so that I didn't feel alone.
Yeah.
And I had to delay going over my lines before I went on. So I remember sitting there going, we're in the money, we're in the money, and then now bring me prisoner 24601. So I didn't have time to press the keys on the keyboard that would bring up that virus in the hard drive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And I went off coffee. I was drinking coffee, so I had to go take anything that was stimulatory off the menu.
You came to London, as you said, and you landed the UK premiere of Sunday in the Park with George, sometimes Sunday in the Park with George. How much did you know about the piece at that time when you were auditioning? 'Cause one of the things that I often think about Sondheim shows is that I'd like to rewind to the point where I can see his shows cold without knowing anything about them. I wish I could recapture that first time experience. So
well, again, Ed, I have to tell you, I was doing Les Mis in London at the time, and I think Cameron he'd put the money up for it. And I have to say, thanks to him, he took me to London. I think he slightly had it in the back of my mind that I could possibly play it anyway, because he'd seen me do Candide years before here in Sydney, and I was an innocent blonde boy, and I think that helped with Les Mis, even though it was a completely different role. And I think Cameron had me slightly in mind for Sunday in the Park with George, because he was starting that Oxford, was it Oxford? Yes, the professorship that Stephen had to do to England. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know, I didn't know who Sondheim was, really, to be honest. I know that sounds stupid and ignorant on my part, but Matt Ryan and Claire Burt were in Les Mis at the time, and dear friends, darling Matt. And Matt and Claire said, I remember when I first sang, they looked at each other and said he could be George, because that high register of mine does sound like Mandy's a bit.
Yeah, it's a tenorial quality.
I never forget when I went and auditioned for the part, Pimlott. I didn't meet Stephen. I went to some theatre in the dark, and I was trying to sing, having done Les Mis, which is all bop, 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 all that, and suddenly I'm doing these 5/4s and offbeats, and blah, blah. I was completely lost because I didn't have a conductor to watch. And I remember hearing a voice from the theatre saying, "Give him more left hand." And it was Stephen. And I did the one audition on stage, and I did a reading, and I was in my dressing room in the half-hour call, and he rang my dressing room, and I was about to go on, and I think Matt Ryan was there, and I said, "It's Stephen Sondheim." Well, Matt tore upstairs. The next minute, I remember I had about 30 cast members looking through the door, and and Stephen saying, "Well, you'll enjoy George, and so I look forward to seeing you." And I hung up, and everyone was screaming, and I didn't know why. I mean, God. And I have to say, I think it was a big jump for me, and it was hard to suddenly go and do that, because I had to work in a different way. It's completely different music.
Yeah.
A troubled character. When I'm looking back on it now, I wasn't easy to work with Maria, who was so wonderfully free, because she hadn't had that rigid. I still had so much of Javert left over in me, and it took me a long while to let go. I remember one day saying I'd like to speak these lyrics, and poor Maria had to endure it with me, because she understood that you didn't have to speak sometimes lyrics, because all the acting was already there. Ironically, I couldn't get some of the rhythm, and Stephen came into rehearsals one day, and I'm trying to count and do all this, and he did exactly what Trevor did. He put his arm around me and walked me up the back, and he said, "Now, just say the lyrics as you would as an actor." Yeah. And I quietly said, "There's nothing to say. I cannot be what you want. I needed you, and you left. You will not accept who I am. I am what I do," which you knew, which you always knew, which I thought you were a part of. And then he said, that's the rhythm.
That's it.
And then I went back and he said, now, Maria, could you try and interrupt Philip at the end of every line? And I went, there's nothing to say. She went to interrupt. I cannot be what you want. I needed you and you left. Shut up. You will not accept your way. Shut up. I'm what I do, which you knew, which you always knew. Shut up, which I thought you were a part of. And he'd written the acting into it. And
that's amazing. That's
I
amazing
regret.
story.
I'd love to go back and redo it now because I was sort of quite stiff, really. But I think that's partly the character, you know.
One of the many astonishing things about the piece, Philip, I think, is that it alone among works of art that I know homes in on this idea of the creative artist's obsessiveness, solitude, selfishness. The idea, as George says, a part of me will always be mapping out a sky. And I think that is astonishing, the way it achieves that.
All that stuff, you know, stop worrying if your vision is new. Let others make that decision. They usually do. You have to move on. The whole thing about moving on, you can't go back. Just always have to move forward, no matter how painful it is. You've got to go on to the next thing. What is it, that wonderful line? The choice may have been mistaken, the choosing was not. You know, basically, you just, if you sit and indulge in your failures and the pain, that's it. You are being self-indulgent, narcissistic. You've got to keep going. And that's hard because, you know, I've suffered mental depression a little bit, and there's times when you go, oh, and curiosity is what's kept me going. I certainly think finishing the hat is the most extraordinary thing. And of course it starts with that beautiful bit where he goes, yes, she looks for me. Good. Let her look me. Fucking let her look for me.
Yeah.
To tell me why she left me. Yeah. And then it goes into this beautiful, tender music, as I always knew she would. I had so there's this lament with this most beautiful melody. Yeah. And people say it's not melodic, but by God.
Have you heard Mandy Patinkin tell that extraordinary story of when Steve first played Finishing the Hat to him? And this ties in with what you were saying about, what we were saying about actors' insecurities and artists' insecurities. And he said Steve came with the song and he sat down at the piano and he said about halfway through, he said it was as if he had been sprayed by the makeup department. He was perspiring, he was soaking wet. He was so anxious about revealing this song for the first time to the people who were going to perform it. And at the end of it, he was desperately looking for approval. I mean, that song hits the nail so firmly on the head, the nail of, you know, the creative person trying to have a life, and the two always in opposition, if you like. Let's just hear the song and bear that story in mind.
Yeah, I'm sorry we never recorded it, really.
Yes, she looks for me. Good. Let her look for me to tell me why she left me, as I always knew she would. I had thought she understood. They have that they should, but it would. Finishing the hat. How you have to finish the hat. How you watch the rest of the world from a window while you finish the hat. Mapping out a sky. What you feel like planning a sky. What you feel when voices that come through the window go until they distance and die. Until there's nothing but sky. And how you're always turning back too late from the grass or the stick or the dog or the light. How the kind of woman willing to wait, not the kind that you want to find waiting to return you to the night. Dizzy from the heart, coming from the hat, studying the hat, entering the world of the hat, reaching through the world of the hat like a window, back to this one from that, studying a face, stepping back to look at a face, leaves a little space in the way like a window, but to see, it's the only way to see. And when the woman that you wanted goes, you can say to yourself, well, I give what I give. But the woman who won't wait for you knows that however you live, there's a part of you always standing by, mapping out the sky, finishing a hat, starting on a hat, finishing a hat. Look, I made a hat where there never was a hat.
You'd forgotten that, didn't you?
I
It's the
wished I'd
Donmar
recorded it.
Warehouse.
I'd forgotten I'd recorded it.
Yeah, Donmar Warehouse
And
Cabaret.
of course, it's Jason Robert Brown playing with his arrangement.
Incredible, absolutely incredible.
I forgot.
I was there, and I remember you made a big thing of pulling out the copies of the song about learning.
Yeah, I did the whole thing about rehearsals because
Yeah.
it was when my son was first born, and I wrote this whole thing into it about rehearsing the play and trying to get it and all the music. And again, I remember rehearsing it as a gift, in his wonderful generosity as he was to me. Then Cameron sent, my wife was pregnant, and he, after I finished Les Mis, he said, I got an envelope and at my at the stage door saying, pack Javert in the left luggage, pack Javert and George in the left luggage and go and have a holiday. And he sent Carol and I to his little place in Provence. And I remember sitting there just trying to learn this music. And that all came back when I sang that. I really did. Because I was getting used to a whole nother way of working. I hadn't made the connections with Sondheim at all in that stage.
Didn't Sondheim say to you one day when you were saying, gosh, it's so complex and so hard to learn, he said, well, you don't want to play tennis with someone you can beat. Didn't he?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Isn't that a
The
great
ball
line?
was coming out. I didn't see the ball when it was coming for me. That's what I said. Poor Maria, she had to put up with this person who didn't understand that complexity. I remember seeing the look in her eyes. So, and because she's the most wonderful musician, she knows exactly where she is. And I had to sit there counting in 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's all these offbeats, which I'd never done because on the pedal piano, they didn't exist. I didn't know what an offbeat was, and that syncopated rhythm. Of course, Shakespeare has taught me all that as well now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's absolutely right.
You've done your fair share of Sondheim shows and roles. We're going to come back to Follies at the end of this conversation. But let's consider another much loved show. You referred to Rodgers and Hammerstein earlier. And that's South Pacific, where you won another Olivier for playing Émile Debec. It was scheduled to happen at Chichester, who presented this series of shows. Daniel Evans, who helped me curate these shows, was going to do it last summer. They've had to postpone. It's scheduled now for July. But again, Trevor Nunn, taking very seriously the issues of war and racism and all the undercurrents that go through that wonderful, wonderful show. And you suddenly realise with those big Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, because the books are so great as well, and because you realise how great they are as time goes by, because they get it absolutely right every time. So what was the experience like on that show?
Well, Trevor, as he invariably does, went back to the source material, the Adventures of the South Pacific. He went back to the original production. A lot of people didn't agree with it, and he put a lot of the songs back in. Trevor does that. And because the way the show was finally shaped had to do with the Broadway effect, which means you've got to get the show down in that time before people leave the theatre to go home on the subway. So it's limited by time. So things like Now Is the Time was put back in. He put back in the original, and he started with what was originally there. It didn't open with that big funny opening. It had the boys Martin, but that was determined because just before rehearsal started, we had September the 11th. And no one knew what was going to happen. And suddenly we didn't know what was going to go on. We didn't know how to do a show about war in the South Pacific, whether we were glorifying it. So he looked at finding real resonances in the original text. And hence the reason he put in Nows at the time. And Emile de Becq saying those things like, I know what you're for, I know what you're against, but what are you for? And that it brought up all those questions. He looked for ways of heightening that. The racism stuff had never made sense to me. I'd seen all this, and Emile de Becq didn't make sense to me. And I had long discussions with Trevor because he was always depicted as this wonderfully suave Frenchman, and I didn't know how he could be. He murdered a man when the original production. He confesses to Nellie that he fought, and this fascist, and the fascist fell over and hit his head. And there was no dilemma. He has to confess to Nellie that he has killed someone with his bare hands. And she still has to fall in love, and in fact falls in love with him when he's honest about that. And that's the original source material. He runs away. He's self-educated. He's an insomniac. He doesn't sleep and he's had no relationships with women except Islander women.
Yeah, extraordinary.
So we put all that back into it, and the whole thing that he reads Walt Whitman and he smokes and he works. He's an artisan. I remember I made little bits of furniture of my own because that's what he would do. And so he is enthralled with this creature that he's never seen, as someone who's sophisticated, and that makes it much more tragic when they nearly make love, because the only women he's had are native women, and he's got children of mixed race or children of hue, and they come in and she thinks they're cute, and she says, "Whose are they?" And he says, "They're mine." And they've almost made love, and she laughs, and he goes, "What? They're mine." And then it dawns, and she is nearly physically ill, and she runs out. And he just doesn't understand it. And ostensibly he goes off basically on a suicide mission. And normally this Nearly Was Mine should be sung alone. And in the cut down version of South Pacific, he sings it with cable, and you can't be that. No. He wouldn't sing that in front of us. So Trevor went back and made it a soliloquy.
Yeah. You've given this dark context so clearly, Philip. It's all there. It's what makes the songs come alive.
And I know it's problematic now. How do we do Bloody Mary? How do we pick that? But you've got to understand, you've got to give these guys some credit. I know we're in difficult political territory at the moment, but they were dealing, to even dare to do what they did in Carousel and the politics of this. They were pushing
incredibly
musicals,
daring.
and they should be given credit for that in lots of ways.
Yeah.
I know we look back at Bloody Mary now and go, it's a bit tokenism, but it wasn't then. I think it was quite shocking because cable goes to the island.
Things are of their time, and you have to accept
yes, they are.
But Rodgers and Hammerstein pushed the envelope constantly. They really did. It's a stupendous score. I know Daniel Evans will be watching this with great interest because he's about to do it himself. Yeah. But and two of the greatest lyric ballads ever written for the Broadway stage, and Emile gets them both. How greedy is that? You've mentioned This Nearly Was Mine. We're going to hear it.
One dream in my heart paradise, this promise of paradise, this really was mine. Close to my heart she came, only to fly away, only to fly as day flies from moonlight. Now I'm alone, still dreaming of paradise, still saying that paradise once really was mine. So clear and deep are my fancies of things I wish were true. I keep remembering evenings I wish I'd spent with you. I keep remembering kisses from lips I'll never own, and all the lovely adventures that we have never known. Now I'm alone, still dreaming of paradise, still saying that paradise once really was mine.
Well,
Oh, I feel old now.
it's a stupendous song.
You
and-
hear Sondheim, you can see where it came from. That whole repetition for an actor, you know,
Yeah.
those repetitions in order for very Shakespeare, not Shakespearean, but that whole thing where he goes, you know, some enchanted evening, you may see a stranger across a crowded room, and somehow you know, all those repetitions of words where you can feel the character thinking of what comes next, and they have to see, you know, finishing the hat, how you have to finish the hat, how you watch the rest of the world from a window while you finish the hat, you know, and you can see what that lineage there.
It's interesting.
And that change in the middle, you know.
It's interesting, Philip, also that Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote the lyric first. And so what you're saying about leading the thought process. And the miracle is, of course, that Rodgers just instinctively knew what to do with those repetitions.
Well, I have to say, Ed, I think they were, a lot of the time, there was a lot of, you know, they wrote for film, a lot of people, they wrote scores, there was all that cross thing, they knew about acting, and also they understood, as Sondheim later told me, that they wrote in speech patterns, and all they had to do was just, the musicality was already in speech, because American speech patterns are different.
Speaking of great melodists, and Rodgers for me was the greatest of them all, we cannot not include our mutual friend Lucy Simon, who wrote a beautiful show with Marsha Norman's Secret Garden, based on the Frances Hodgson Burnett children's novel. You've had quite a long association with it, Philip, because you played both roles, both the male roles. And we both became quite close to Lucy. And what a perfect fit for her to... I hope she's watching this, by the way. I did tip her off.
I hope so too. Because we still managed to communicate.
Good.
And of course, the show, they rewrote a lot of the show. Adrian Noble rewrote it for the RSC and did considerable changes. I loved both of them, but they took a lot of the ghosts out, and I quite loved the rewrites for London too. So it had a completely different feeling. You know?
The timing of of the London production was unfortunate. It came into the West End very early one year, and it was a beautiful production, I thought. And Adrian Noble, wasn't it?
Yes, and there was a lot of politics involved, because I never forget when we did it at Stratford, we were packed out. The kids came. Yeah. I looked back at the review. The reviews were raves, and on the opening night when all the critics came, children were there, and the critics sat amongst them, and enthralled, and because they were watching this story. And of course, we got to the West End, and there was a lot of politics about Adrian Noble becoming commercial, I think. And the very same show, I knew we were in trouble on opening night, because the sort of demographic that was invited were people who screamed, "Woo!" and did all that cheering, and the show lost its rhythm. And I remember, I still think so many of the reviews there were about not wanting Adrian to do a Trevor Nunn and John Caird. And of course, Les Miserables earned a lot of money for the RSC. And I think there was so much anger there and the same show got absolutely panned, and I never understood it. And I thought it was a beautiful show. Again, I brought a lot of darkness to the character. I never even brought a gun on stage. I was about to kill myself.
Yeah.
I played a lot of angsted characters, haven't I?
I once made the mistake of telling Mr. Sondheim that how fond I was of this show, and he made a face, and I said, you don't like it? And he said, I don't like the lyrics. The lyrics are terrible. So I said, but what about the score? It's gorgeous. It's very folk based. And he said, I said, too sweet? And he said, yeah, too sweet. So I said, and I was very bold at that time, I said, well, what about those two songs at the end of Into the Woods? You know, children will listen and no one is alone. And he came back quick as a flash. It was a provocative thing to say. And he came back quick as a flash and said, that's the only music I could have written at that point in the show. And that was me silenced.
Yes, interestingly enough, I think the whole folkiness and Lucy's background, you know, as the Simon Sisters and singing all those songs that she did with Carly. I think that's what made them glorious to sing.
They are
I
glorious.
found it, isn't it funny? Look, it is a matter of taste, but I love Thai food, but I like French food as well.
Yeah, of course.
They taste beautiful in your mouth, and I never once, although I did love the rewrites they did in England and the arrangements, and it was made much sort of darker and in lots of ways, and probably that's me. But I think Race You to the Top of the Morning, all those...
the beautiful songs.
Just to sing, they were great soliloquies. I loved it. And I can't sort of say, they made me cry, you know.
But me too.
And I have to say, that big thing at the end of How Could I Ever Know, is one of the great... it's been people who have been very depressed and have thought they could never go on, in huge numbers have heard that song, and it's given them great hope.
Well, it's
not much.
The show is about rebirth in so many ways. It's about Archie getting past his wife's death, and the garden is symbolic of all that. I agree with you. I think the songs are just from the heart beautiful. I remember the first time I heard the duet Lily's Eyes. I was driving with a friend along the Pacific Coast Highway, as you do, and he had this on, and when we got to the disguised modulation, I nearly went through the sunroof. I said, what is this? And because it reminded me even then of the Pearl Fishers duet from Bizet's opera.
And two baritones coming together to do that. I mean, it's why I did the show, actually, because I'd been in Les Mis with Anthony Warlow, who'd played...
well, that's the version we're going to play of Lily's Eyes, actually. Yeah.
And I heard that, and you know, it was a support role, and that was my job. And when I heard that, I thought, I have to sing that with Anthony, because those songs don't come along. I did it for that duet, you know, really.
Well, let's get an earful of this and rekindle that experience of me driving along in the car, not knowing where this came from.
Strangely quiet, but now the storm simply rests to strike again. Standing, waiting, I think of her. I think of strange this Mary. She leaves the room, yet remains. She lingers on. Something stirs me to think of her. I think of her. From death she casts her spell. All night we hear her sighs. And now a girl has come who has her eyes. She has her eyes. The girl has Lily's hazel eyes. Those eyes that saw him happy long ago. Those eyes that gave him life and hope he'd never known. How can he see the girl and miss those hazel? She has her eyes. The girl has Lily's hazel eyes. Those eyes that closed and left me all alone. Those eyes I feel will never ever let me go. How can I see this girl who has her hazel eyes? In Lily's eyes a castle this house seemed to be, and I her bravest knight became. My lady fair was she. She has her eyes, she has my Lily's hazel eyes. Those eyes that loved my brother, never me. Those eyes that never saw me, never knew. I long to hold her close, to live at last in Lily's eyes. Imagine me a lover, I longed for the day she'd turn and see me standing there. Would God had let her stay. She has her eyes. She has Lily's hazel eyes. Those eyes that saw me happy long ago. How can I now forget that once I dared to be in love, alive and whole, in Lily's eyes, in Lily's eyes.
How thrilling is that?
Yeah, I'm starting to think I'm at my own funeral. If you understand, it
I'm
feels
sorry.
like a bit,
in this instance, Pache, Mr. Sondheim, because that is something else.
It is, and it's interesting hearing both because I had to sing other parts. I did it with Peter Polycarp, although he didn't do the London recording, alas. And but it was. And it's got the most extraordinary thing that happens is you get a release of, in the middle of that, you get this incredible release of plot where one brother in that wonderful duet who's been subservient looking after his brother suddenly confesses in his own little world that he coveted his brother's wife, and he's angry that she loved him instead of me. And when you think about it, to hear that anger within this beautiful melody.
Yes, it's
a real trick.
It's more complex than meets the ear.
Yes.
But one is swept away by it. You very sweetly came in. I used to have a radio show called Stage and Screen. And
I remember it very well. We came in and Lucy, we had a piano,
yes,
and wow.
A whole program. And you came and sang a bit of Earth. From the Secret Garden in the studio.
You don't have that, do you?
I do have it, and no, I don't have it here
Heard it.
because it's a BBC recording. But it is the program is available on my website for anybody who's interested in hearing you do that version with just Michael Kozerin at the piano, Disney's music supervisor.
It very, very clearly.
Special occasion.
I remember sitting there with Lucy just there and
Yes.
just being able to do it filmically.
Yes, extraordinary. It was a special day.
Oh.
Now, before we talk about Follies, I want to just touch upon a piece that is developed in association with Cameron Mackintosh, and that was The Fix, where you won your one of your 3 Oliviers. Dana P. Rowe and John Dempsey's musical. Now, this was essentially about a fictional US politician who gets mixed up in organised crime. Stranger than fiction? I don't think so.
No.
I mean, if we did it now, people would say, well, that's fairly commonplace, yeah.
I think it was timing. We were just about to do it, and it looked like Tony Blair would get in. No one wanted that cynicism of politics. And of course, if you did it later on with the Iraq War, and I have to tell you, Ed, deep in my heart, I think it's probably, for me, I don't congratulate myself on things, but I thought it was probably some of the best work I'd done ever as an actor. And I did it very close after Secret Garden, but it was utterly exhausting because, as you know, I had to play it on crutches and with a polio and a crippled leg, and I started, and I don't know how I got through that section of 2 guys from Harvard and it went straight. I think it's about 11 minutes of singing to 2 guys from Harvard straight into First Came Mercy. And I remember being so exhausted, but I also just love working with Sam. His sense of humor was phenomenal. I really did love it, and I love that macabre humor. It fitted me. It fitted me vocally. You know, I loved doing it. I had a fantastic time.
No, well, we love seeing it. I was going to play First Came Mercy, but it's long, and you need to hear the whole thing.
You sort of need to go from 2 guys to Harvard because, you know, but just to do that, you know, and it's sort of strangely tasteless because, you know, I've got polio now, and whether or not you can play it, and, you know, do I have to be a starter? Do I have to have had polio? And you know, and he was gay as well, so he said he had the trifecta, and he had an elder brother, and there was there's some incredible, you know, one dated the cripple, the other. It was right on the edge, you know. And but I remember researching it. I went to see a guy who had polio, and I said, "How do you get out of bed into the wheelchair?" And he fell out onto the floor, and he had calipers on. And I tried to help him. He said, "No, don't help me." And I remember sitting there, Ed, and it took him 10 minutes to get into that chair from the floor. And I watched him, and he just wouldn't. He ignored that I was there, and the struggle, and it informed me for the whole performance. So I felt I honoured him. I told him that I was playing that it was great. He came, and you know, I put that into the show. Big sting, really big sting, like nothing I've done really.
It's important that new work like that gets developed. I imagine there's interesting new work being done all the time in Australia as well as the UK.
No, there's not.
No? Really? That surprises me.
It's a sort of kind of contention, really, because we tend to... It's easier to put on existing works that are proven because you only have to rehearse them for 4 weeks. You mount them and you get them on, and, you know, overseas producers, you know, they're all done here. Everything's being done. Fun Home's being done. Mamma Mia's being done. American Psycho, Young Frankenstein, West Side Story's done. We've had Pippin, and I'm thinking, where's the Australian stuff? We don't have that tradition of putting on, of commercial producers actually investing in it. It's really quite difficult, I think, Ed, and it's rather depressing because they're costly, and even in a small venue, people want something that's proven.
It's interesting. I mean, it makes the UK scene seem healthier. I mean, not just in regional theatre like Chichester, where they've done new work, and Sheffield and other Leicester, but also on the fringe, off West End, where a lot of interesting stuff gets performed that would never see the light of day commercially. I bring you warm greetings from Imelda Staunton, who has been in this series.
Has she?
I had a
I
great.
bet she hated listening to herself.
I had a great time with her, and
Did she hate listening to herself?
she disguised it pretty well. If she did, she was.
Yes.
She's like you, her own worst critic, and
Yeah.
you know, I could see her thinking, little nuance there I could have done differently, and you know, but no, I mean,
Exactly.
she was fascinating.
Well, also you talk about don't play tennis with someone. You know, what is it? That someone that
who's you don't play tennis with someone who you can beat.
well, that's the thing that Imelda is. That ball comes back at you so fast. No matter
Yeah.
what you give her, it comes back, and boy, does it put you on your toes. And it was just a joy from start to finish. You know, and as you know, I retired after Follies because I thought that's as good as it gets, really.
Well,
and I haven't.
We'll come back to that thought, but it's as good as it gets is a good phrase, because I really think that Dominic Cook production is pretty definitive. I saw the previous New York revival with Bernadette Peters, which I also thought was very fine, in that there were actors of real quality performing this work, and suddenly the book comes into its own, and the score comes into its own. You realise what a masterpiece it is. But the Dominic Cook production, I thought what it got particularly well was the mirroring of the age groups. So the young people were constantly shadowing their older selves in the show, and the blocking was so complex with people's sight lines, and it was fascinating to watch.
Well, I'd done a concert version of it, which Imelda was in, I think, with Maria years before. We did it at, where was it? Oh, I can't remember, with the London Philharmonic somewhere.
Okay.
And then I'd done a concert version of it in Melbourne about a year and a half before the Follies in London. I have never wanted to play a role, except that one. That's the only one I thought, oh. And when it was auditioning, they asked me to send a tape over, and I thought, I can't. So I flew over to London for it and met Dominic, and we rehearsed. And because you can't do it over tape, you know, as much as and immediately I took to him, because one of the reasons the blocking and all that was so wonderful is because he cast actors who knew their craft.
Quite.
And he left actors alone.
Really?
He didn't say, go there, go there. We played, and we did a lot of games and exercises, and while we were doing things, the others were allowed to create their own path behind us, the ghosts behind us. And so the complexity came out of the actor's absolute own creativity of the role. And sometimes Dominic had this incredible ability to leave you alone. He would come and see the show and he wouldn't say much. He'd say, I never want to see the same thing twice. Within that, you had to respect what blocking was there, but you had to approach it like you had never heard what the other, and not trick the other actor, but surprise them all the time, which life is like.
Yeah.
And he gave me a note one night, and he just sent a text and said, Philip, I saw the show last night, just a thought. He said he really doesn't want to be there, but no one would ever know. And so therefore you note yourself, you know, you go through the whole process, and he would just give very, very specific things, you know, the wonderful thing, a true director's specific in their criticism, general in their praise. Just leave the things that are good alone, which he did. He didn't say that moment's great. If he didn't say anything, the actors went back and they were allowed to discover what was great about it. Of course, the pre-production with Billy and he and the designers, you know, lighting and costume was, they had put so much pre-preparation into it. So you felt secure from the very, very beginning that the team was all on the same page.
Crucially, this was, of course, the original version, which is the only version of Follies. It's the only version.
Well, because everyone tried to make it commercial. Cameron had changed it and said, "Oh no, can't end on a downer, and we can't."
Absolutely.
You know, but audiences want to work. They want to be made work.
Absolutely,
you know,
that revamp that came to London at the Shaftesbury with Cameron's production, the changes were, I thought, pretty catastrophic actually. And I said to Steve once, how could you lose The Road You Didn't Take, which is the whole show in a song, basically? And he said, because I'm a collaborator. He said, because my colleagues wanted to try something different, and I thought, fair enough, I need to collaborate. But there's no question that, you know, the original version is the one.
Well, The Road You Didn't Take is the finishing of the hat. It's that absolute reveal of the pain of the pain of being alone and regret, and, you know, that whole thing. And it's got this slight little ending where, you know, and he allowed himself, he said that's one time he allowed himself a little bit of pleasure, not to the point of hubris, but when he wrote The Ben I'll Never Be, he remembers him. Yeah,
absolutely.
He allowed himself a slight bit of pleasure on that. You can sort of see why, because it's so look, it's an extraordinary piece to sing. I have to say that the other thing you're probably leading, are you going to play that, are you?
Oh, I will do, yeah.
Okay. I remember the other thing, the wonderful thing for me was the breakdown.
Yeah, well, that's, I was just about to say.
I never did it the same twice.
Yeah. Tell us.
We started blocking it, and Dominic said I had to lead it, because when I started doing the same thing, the ensemble behind me started acting because they knew it was not real. So I used to change it every night, and we had a cue that when I went back into it, it would start. But sometimes, I remember one night I just stood there and said, and I slightly went Australian so that the audience thought, Stephen sometimes called it a Pirandello moment, where the audience should feel uncomfortable, as they should in Sweeney Todd, when Sweeney comes out and says, "You, sir," you think the actor has lost control, you know, during Epiphany. It's the same moment. We think, oh, the actor's lost it. And I slightly went Australian with that, oh, God, I'm sorry, so that they thought, they didn't know whether it was me or the actor. And one night I remember standing there and just said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this." And I stood, and the cast got uncomfortable because they didn't know what I was doing. And I stood, and I looked off, and I stood, and I stood, and I started to cry. And finally, one person in the audience said, "It's all right, Philip, you can start again." At which point I looked and went, "What?" Back into character sort of thing. What? And then, "Oh, yes, you would say that, wouldn't you?" You know, and then we're back into it again.
Amazing.
And it was, and because that's what a breakdown's like. You never know how it's going to hit you. I walked off stage one night. Another night, you know, I'd yell or I'd just do, and I never planned anything. And for me, that was liberating.
Well, this is one of the most electrifying moments in all musical theatre, and the fact that it wasn't there in the revision is even more staggering. I can tell you,
it never worked for me when I'd done the other three. It never worked. I knew that there was a way of doing it, but it never worked that the audience bought that the character breaks down. So I had to try and find a way, and that's why I did that little stammer, and I actually smiled and went, "I'm sorry," because they go, oh, is that Philip or the actor? Or
yeah.
And so to find that delicate balance, and some nights it sort of didn't, and I had to be selfish with it, really.
I went with an Italian to see it on one of the 3 occasions I saw it at the National.
3?
And and this Italian guy, who wasn't into musical theatre particularly, but thought it was a beautiful show, when the moment happened, he was nudging me like crazy, as if to say, "He's forgotten his," you know, and and I thought, it's working. It's a sensational moment. We should listen to The Road You Didn't Take, because that's the show right there. And great, great song.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful.
Different men need different things. Knowing what you want, that's the secret. You're either a poet, or you're a lover, or you're the famous Benjamin Stone. You take one road, you try one door, there isn't time for any more. One's life consists of either or. One has regrets, which one forgets, and as the years go on, the road you didn't take hardly comes to mind, does it? The door you didn't try, where could it have led? The choice you didn't make never was defined, was it? Dreams you didn't dare are dead, were they ever there? Who said, I don't remember at all? The books I'll never read wouldn't change a thing, would they? The girls I'll never know, I'm too tired for. The lives I'll never lead couldn't make me sing, could they? Could they? Could they? Chances that you miss, ignore, ignorance is bliss. What's more, you won't remember at all, not at all. You yearn for the women, long for the money, envy the famous Benjamin Stones. You take your road, the decades fly, the yearnings fade, the longings die. You learn to bid them all goodbye, and oh, the peace, the blessed peace, at last you come to know. The road you never take go through rocky ground, don't they? The choices that you make aren't all that grim. The world you'll never see still will be around, won't they? The Ben I'll never be, who remembers him.
That phrase, you won't remember at all, where he goes off into this
I haven't listened to that before.
in the music. It's just astonishing, that bit of melody there.
The thing about it is that on the surface, it's this wonderful jaunty, because he's showing off. He's just talking about his life, and, it doesn't matter. And it creeps, of course, there's interludes in amongst that. And it creeps up on him, and he suddenly forgets that Sally's there. And there's this anger against his wife and the past, and that, and yet the music's just jaunting along, and then it just slightly changes, and then he realizes that, oh well, he's exposed himself too much, and he has to cover up again. And of course, I think the purpose the song serves is that Sally gets to see him covering up and the pain that he's in, and that makes her think, he needs me. The song serves that purpose in the same way that when he does the opposite to her, of course.
Yes.
When she sees in Buddy's eyes.
Yes.
She gets to observe, and during that song she says, I think I remember him. I think I loved him once, and suddenly there is the possibility of another life. But he exposes himself in a way, and he doesn't know he's done it, because that music's just going along, like he's always done, and suddenly it opens up this wound. And she just puts a hand in that wound and goes, right inside, and says, and it gives her hope, because she sees this man who's in who's desperately unhappy, who feels like to the outside world that he has everything.
The dynamics in your performances, your relationship with Janie D, Phyllis, and Imelda, the dynamics were extraordinary.
Look, Janie's
Janie, this dysfunctional marriage that is nonetheless there for keeps, and poor Sally, who's got years of therapy ahead of her probably, if she survives at all.
That tragedy, and of course, he hasn't changed in a weird sort of way, because the irresponsibility of, and in his narcissism, and of actually not seeing how desperately she is in love with him. He's really thinking about himself, in thinking about himself, really, it's just, I think anyone who's been in any form of long-term relationship understood it, and by God, talking about the ball coming at you as well, Janie, the other thing, by God, does it come back as well. It's just delivered up in spades.
Yeah.
And Peter too, Peter Forbes, and Tracy and Di Botcher. I never. You were in a class of Ferraris, really.
It was very special. I mean, are you serious about retirement from the stage, Philip? Come on.
Ed, I don't know what there is to say. That felt like it's painful. I've had so many great experiences, but it's painful being in musicals. Also, I'm tired, really, to be honest. And film is much easier, and television, and I love teaching.
Yeah,
of course.
And you're very good at it.
I can't see what I have left to say.
Right.
As I said, I've done another little cabaret, and I tell stories of my life. And interesting, when I say interesting, I try and reflect on things, because there's a lot of other shows that I've done. If your funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, Hunting of the Snark was one I loved doing. And again, it was an unfortunate situation as well. I thought Mike did an incredible job on it. And of course, it was 10 years before its time. So there were. I've had a lot of things, but when that came together, where everything seemed to come together, I thought, I don't want to get in another musical where a lot of people don't know what they're doing.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah.
And the National is a wonderful place, but I've had to do, sometimes where the director's good, but the MD's not good, where you're trying to teach the director, but you can't teach the director. You've got to do your job. I was just able to do my job, and that was it. And that was so fulfilling. Mind you, I went home on a Saturday night, I could barely walk, and I've now had a hip replacement. I'm still on a walking stick at the moment.
Okay.
So it wore me out. But look, Ed, I think I did this show for the Sydney Festival, and the irony was, I think at my age, at 63, I was actually singing better than I've ever sung. That's the weird thing. But I don't know what else there is to do.
Well, never say never. And look, it's been a real pleasure hearing some of your innermost thoughts on some of this repertoire. And it's one of your great qualities as an actor, that one can see the thought process happening and feel the thought process happening. And, I've always enjoyed our conversations, and this is no exception. And
likewise, Ed. And I sort of will miss musicals, because they require a mental athleticism of thought that you don't often get in a play, because that music forces you to you got to keep going. You have to, and I miss that. I miss that aspect of it, where you have to keep your mental agility and fitness up. But it's funny listening to you now. I mean, I do remember that, and talking to you now, that day in the studio with Lucy, dear Lucy, and likewise you, just to talk to someone who has such knowledge about about musical theatre and the difficulties we face, and how hard it is to get it right. That's always a relief. It makes talking very easy. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And keep pickling, keep fishing, keep
will.
teaching.
I'm getting a new boat at the moment.
I'd love to see you over here at some point, Philip. So
all right.
Back for a visit.
I will, Ed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.